There we go. We're back live on the air. Welcome, everyone. We're back for our study session this evening. And I will, in the interest of time, turn it over to Dr. Reed to do the introductions and lead us today.
Thank you, President Swain. Tonight, we're really taking a look at our strategic planning refresh. And in the spirit of this topic and our study session, we planned about 60 minutes, if we need that, to talk about two topics related to the planning refresh. One is have a little bit of dialogue about the portrait of a graduate feedback we received from our community conversations. And two, I've been asked to provide, if you will, a chart that lists all of our goals and the measurements in one place so we can sort of thoughtfully look at those and try to decide if we have some areas we would like to see more measurements in, or maybe measurements that aren't effective, or ideas we have about those as we move forward. Mutu will join us in January. Again, we will be doing the portrait of a graduate feedback with students, with the student board, with staff, and we'll be bringing a draft back, of course, to the community as well. And we're looking at ways to integrate the 16 equity indicators from the research article Mutu shared with us 2 meetings ago with the portrait of a graduate and the strategic plans. We want to weave together those big ideas. So I've also asked Dr. Tracy Malloy to join us this evening. She's our Chief Leadership and Strategy Officer, and honestly has carried the lift of putting this entire document together. And I really appreciate that, with feedback from our regional assistant superintendents. As you know, the bulk of the work involving students happens in the classroom, and with our principals, teachers, support staff, and the regional assistant superintendents working directly with them. So perhaps we could start with the conversation around the portrait of a graduate. We had an opportunity to look at quite a bit of feedback. I know communications is still collating or collecting the specific screen grabs, but just wanted to kind of get a feel for you about any of the topics that resonated. And also, we could look at a couple sample portraits of a graduate from other school systems that Mutu has shared. Just kind of want to get a feel for what your preferences are on that topic this evening before we move to the measurements document.
Oh, I think it'd be nice to throw those up quickly, or at least one of them, and maybe talk a little bit about how you, maybe it'd be good to see Dr. Malloy and Dr. Reed, what your how you see those portraits. Is it being any different than what we kind of have painted as a graduate in our own district, or what do you see that's kind of new, or what you like, what you see there? Thank you.
All right, I'll send these to Tracy so she can post one of them. Trying to look at which one. We have one from Shelby County Public Schools, or we have one from Fresno Unified. I think Tracy, if you could throw up we'll try Fresno first and then Shelby County.
I was going to say, I like the Shelby County one better.
Okay, let's throw up Shelby County first and then Fresno.
Okay, let me just find them in my email and get them sorted so that I can share my screen. So just 1 second.
Just for a little clarification, Dr. Reed, the portraits, graduate portraits from these districts, are they in addition to a strategic plan, like, similar to what we have?
Yes, which is to say, currently we have 5 goals, and goal 5 is really around success after graduation. And then we have 4 building blocks that support the work to attain the 5 goals. The portrait of a graduate is a piece that's kind of a capstone piece that we would put in that would be aligned with our strategic plan. And one of the things we might say is that our plan, if we meet all our goals, should lead to the portrait of a North Shore graduate that is captured within, and that's a piece we don't currently have. So it's about sort of crafting what it would look like if we do our work really well. It's probably a combination of the goals and pieces here. So this is a Shelby County Public Schools. Thanks, Tracy, for pulling that up so quickly.
Yeah, this is a good one.
It really actually has a lot of the characteristics in our plan, but very clear about what it looks like from a student-centered perspective.
And I think that description is key, at least for me when I was looking through these, the fact that these are so very focused on aspirations for what the student can be and can achieve, as opposed to, the strategic plan is so focused on this is what we need to do to get our students to that.
Right. And we need a plan for how to get our students to this, for sure. I mean, that each aspect is constructed to do exactly what we hope.
So just because we will go down a rabbit hole if permitted. So are there certain like parameters, like how many traits is optimal? I probably don't want 20, but I like how this is categorized. So you have some detail, but there's still 6 traits really that are focused on. But any things we should keep in mind?
I think the fewer, the better. And what you'll see, I think, both in Shelby County and Fresno, I think Mutu prefers 5, even maybe 4, but 6 would be on the outside.
That's helpful. Thank you.
And I do think there is some overlap in some of these, so could be a process of eliminating the overlap, I guess. But
and something, and I shot a note to Superintendent Reed about this observation when she first sent these to us, but I don't know if I heard Director Hayes and Director McGorty both say they preferred this one too. I like this one too, because this is for every student. There was some language in the other one that, and this is something we talked about, I think, the other day, about the emphasis on college prep, where, any of our graduates is going to be expecting, all sorts of challenges and necessary skills, no matter what kind of post-secondary certification they end up receiving. We know the likelihood is they'll need some sort of post-secondary certification in order to keep going in a career. But these, we did express a desire to stop tipping the scale with that college word quite so much, because that might have some inadvertent consequences within our system by doing that. And that's one thing I liked about this one.
I don't have any brilliant ideas on how to limit it from 6 to 5 or 4. I think all of them are things that I value as a person and see are important, but I'm certainly willing to listen to what other brilliant ideas people have for squishing them into fewer categories. My only and is I would love to see language around the idea that all of our students will be tech workers, and that technology is a basic core instruction, that it's not a class you take and a semester of your junior year, or we're not training tech workers. Everybody is going to have to use technology in some fashion in whatever they do. Even dairy farmers are running very sophisticated equipment, and so embedding that in our work, that the expectation that all students will be able to understand and use technology, have a basic understanding of binary and hexadecimal. Amy's going to be able to correct me, but whatever the base 16 word is.
Hexadecimal.
Thank you. All right, I was almost there. Just some of that core understanding of how ones and zeros and bits and bytes and all those things work, so that it's not a mystery or so forth, and whatever, because we know that whatever we teach them how to use a Zoom link today, by the time they're in the workforce, who knows how we communicate will look. So, but it will be based on ones and zeros. So making sure they have that basic understanding.
That's a great point, Director Hayes. I was just thinking about, what are the basic skills? I mean, you look at, we do a lot of hiring in our company, and not all the positions you have to have a college degree, but you do. Some of the minimums are like at least a basic or up to an advanced knowledge of how to use Microsoft Office, just Excel and PowerPoint. And I'm not sure all of our kids coming out of high school know how to do that. I know most people don't know how to learn, don't use Excel even coming out of college unless they go into finance, or some other social science kind of aspect. But there are some things maybe that we have I don't know if we have a tech kind of menu that we want our kids to know, rather than it just being an elective, and that, I don't know, it's a topic of discussion. And there's some things we want our kids to be, because if a kid is going to graduate from high school, maybe they don't go into community college or a trade right away, but how do we give them a few minimal skills in the tech world, like saying using Office and Excel and that type of thing? Just gives them a edge up.
I want to harken back to our conversation in the board meeting about how narrow and how wide to be. And I think that'll be a challenge with this work as well, is where do we kind of come up with some key ideas that really apply for all of our students? And, where do we deviate and become more specific on certain attributes or skills that we feel are really critical for our students moving forward post high school. So, but I think it's really nice to lay it out like this. And I think using the 16 parameters that Mutu pulled out of the research paper, I think is a really great way to start. It really can focus the conversation along some of those proven key topics.
I agree, Director Kogan. Just thinking back to the comments about what's the word I'm looking for? Global nature of technology and the need for using technology. Think about our sort of baseline of our students will leave us able to succeed and function in a world yet to be imagined, right? Which leads me to, we really don't want to specify anything. It's similar to, we don't want to say they're going to be ready for college. College is not the end goal. It's they will be ready for whatever might come their way, whatever challenges they will meet. And I guess I'm a little skeptical that technology as we know it today will be there in 5 years, given the speed with which things are moving. So I think it's a great thing to make sure we capture that somehow, but without being very specific about it, if that makes sense. Oh.
You okay there, Jackie?
Sorry, I lost my screen. Hang on a sec.
So
Ah, there we go.
I'm gonna push back, and I recognize maybe I haven't been clear. So the technology conversation is great, and I think Jackie nailed exactly where I was going. But the higher ed component, we had the meeting with Stephen Gehring. There was a study or survey done out of about 6 districts in Southeast King County. Our students need to go on to higher ed. I mean, that whether it's a 4-year university or community college or tech school, they need to go on to higher ed. The era of finding meaningful and life sustaining work that you can earn a livable wage at with a high school diploma, I think is just over, unfortunately. And we can certainly have a conversation of whether the college degree is actually adding something, but whatever it is now a required element for jobs. And so, and I don't think I heard anyone actually say that, but I want to make sure that kids are going to go on in some way to continue their education, that they aren't done with the high school diploma.
So, and this would be maybe a fun little exercise to have. So I only touched on it briefly, but kind of what I was thinking is sometimes you see frameworks that talk about career and college readiness that just puts kids in 2 buckets, right? And I think moving beyond the 2 buckets, right? And even if it has really subtle effects on the system, before you know it, you might be tracking someone in your head and you don't really even realize that. But maybe it's what you said, Sandy. If our goal is to prepare everyone for higher education, like for post secondary, I mean, I think we need a good word for it, but we need them all, every single one of them, to be able, whether they do it when they're 18 or they're 28 or 38 or 48, right? To be, maybe not 48. Maybe we can't be responsible for that. But like, even if it's not right away, right? If they have to work first to save up money, right? Like we just want to prepare everyone with all these really in-depth skills and not have the folks inadvertently apply this filter about whether it's career prep or college prep or what have you, right? So that's what I was trying to get at. And I think, kind of like how we were defining, how do you define success, right? Like, so there's a very traditional viewpoint of what success for students is. And I think we've been trying to evolve beyond that and make it more nuanced, because there's so many shades of gray now. So, maybe that's a challenge to stick in our brains. How do we talk about preparing every single child for a challenging post-secondary, right? Like, where the next spot, so they're all prepared.
Oh, thank you, Amy. That nailed it. That was great.
Oh,
and
almost. So just so you feel better, but I think we need a word for that.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I'm having this aha moment that I think in my head and the way career and college, that vocabulary is being used, that it butts up against our equity work, that it has become a tracking device in a way that I don't think we want it to be. And so I think you're right. I think we need to revamp the vocabulary.
The other thing too is I think a lot of this discussion fits under the lifelong learner, is that you're going to leave high school and then the next morning, what next? And that path will change, and that path is going to require a variety of different options. Some of it may be formal training or formal learning. Some of it may be personal exploration, personal learning, exploration. And I think that the more we can kind of link this with the comment before, how do we define success? That's a challenge, because it really is going to be individually dependent. And I think these goals we want to set up students as much as possible to leave school ready to continue that learning path in whatever form it may take as it changes throughout their life.
And I think
But-
it has to do with giving the student agency over what they choose to do, so that they have the skills that we haven't even subconsciously, inadvertently put them in a spot where they don't have full agency over what they choose to do after high school. They have everything they need. But we need a word for that.
Yeah, I think some of that too is helping students to understand the world outside of high school, right? It's very intimidating, especially if you really don't know what you want to do. If you don't have a preconceived path, it can be pretty intimidating. I think some kids are now, what do I do? I'm not sure. I need a year to think about it. So, and I know we do some good work with counseling and Naviance and all that, but yeah, I think the better we can have a high school graduate as they move towards graduation, kind of understand what the options are out there. What are some of the career paths? What are the non-4-year college career paths? What are some of the alternative things? And I don't know how we do that, but I think that helps students kind of think about where they might want to go or where they could go. They might come up with something that they haven't thought of before, right? We have the same problem with students graduating from college with 4-year degrees in the same spot as where they were when they got out of high school, right? Sometimes, what do I do now? So I think the more we can kind of help kids sort through it and take some of the pressure off I need to know immediately, helps. But I think it's just giving them more of a universal understanding of education and where the economy is going and what jobs might be out there. I don't know how we put that together, but
So I'm going to say something, and certainly the rest of you may just tether me as I float way out in aspiration land here. But I'm wondering if this idea of a career is even still an option for an 18-year-old in 2020. That the idea that you're going to pick a career that you will actually then do for the next 40 years. That I'm wondering if the world is going to change so much that they'll do something for 5 or 10 years and then do something else and then do something else. And that this pressure, to your point, President Swain, you have to pick a career, when the reality is there are jobs that are going to develop in 10 or 20 years that certainly don't exist. And so how do we prepare kids for that world?
yeah, I think I think the statistics already show it. That most kids or young people have 5 to 7 different careers throughout their life, right? And I think that's been a theme for a while. Maybe it's preparing for life outside of high school, right?
Or I think sometimes the idea of developing a trade almost. I don't know how to, like, I always, when I first had the opportunity of attending a career day that you wonderfully set up, Director Hayes, at Timbercrest, I give the example, I work in web design, and the internet did not exist when I was in high school. The internet barely existed when I was in college. Sorry to age myself. But the fact of the matter is, it combines some passions I have and some things that I studied deeply about. And I was kind of ready when it popped up on my horizon, right? So what was it about my educational journey? And I don't mean to personalize this, I'm sorry, but I use that as an example to the middle schoolers. Like, what is it that you really want to dive deep on, and then be ready to have, be ready to pivot when things come. And so I think, sometimes when you think about a trade or just an area of, sometimes that word passion's used, and I don't know if that's quite the right one either, because that has to do more with what you love, but also, you need the skills to back that up and combine it with what President Swain said about an understanding about how you move forward with your next steps. So yeah, I'm still struggling to find my word.
I love thinking about this being very inspirational and not at all restrictive, because the more restrictive we are, the less applicable it's really going to be. We talk about having jobs that weren't even in possibility when you graduate high school. A lot of people have jobs that are possible, but will change. Just because you say you have an idea what you want to do, when you get out there and do that, it may not be really where your interests and hearts and talent lie. So again, I just think the more open-ended we can be to give people the success to be healthy, physically, mentally, happy, successful by their own definition, continuing to contribute throughout their life, the broader the better.
Well, I think just to kind of riff off of that, Director Kogan, I think some of the ideas are I think captured in this this page, but I think about it in terms of, I guess, teaching our students to be risk takers on one hand, but also to be flexible, to be willing to challenge themselves and to leave us with confidence in their own abilities to learn and to change.
All good stuff.
Dr. Reed, I recognize I have a tendency to wander into exciting things that I want to talk about. Did we at all address the question that was asked?
Well, yes, we did. I think we needed to, and this is one of the reasons I felt like it just needed to be a conversation that you all have, because you need to make sense of what we're hearing and what we're seeing as you put this together in collaboration with our students and our staff and our families. And I just think the more you dialogue about it, each time you're getting a little bit closer to, I think, what I can understand that we're headed, if that makes sense. So this is really helpful. Did you want to see the Fresno example as well as a comparable, or do we just want to move on to the measure and goal document?
I think we can move on. We've seen these before. We can review them again later.
Okay, that'd be fabulous. Then I'll ask Dr. Malloy to pull up the document that she has expended great time and energy on. President Swain, would it be appropriate for me to have her explain the chart to us, and then we can kind of walk through each goal?
Yep, that'll work.
All right, Tracy, if you would kind of describe how you've constructed this, and then we'll, after you've kind of run through it, then we'll go back up to goal or up to the top, and I guess as the board would like to process this. So thanks, Tracy.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Reed, and good evening. So what I was asked to do was to help put together a document or a chart that you could use to track the current goals in the strategic plan and the measures associated with each. Those are embedded in our strategic plan. And then the metrics that we've been using over the last several years to track our progress. So what you see across the top, and let me just get this as much as I can on the screen. What you see across the top are the goal statements, goals 1 through 5. And then each measure is listed in this document in its own row. What's underneath each one of the measures are the specific data points that you have seen over the last 2 years relative to each one of the measures. So for example, for goal 1, success in the early years, related to the increased percentage of students who have equitable access to developmentally appropriate teaching, the data points that have been shared over the last 2 years, well, actually last year specifically, were the number of students served by birth to 2 early childhood programs, and you got year-over-year data so that you could see the trends in enrollment. You were also shown Ready Start program results, and specifically you were shown the percentage of students who were meeting expectations in gold assessment categories, with the gold assessment being that particular series of measures that's used in the preschool grades to determine students' ability to engage cognitively, their physical well-being, all sorts of measures. Also, you have been shown, let me just scroll down. You've been shown lots of data around enrollment in early childhood programs and so on. So for each one of the goals, as I said, you can see there's measures and then there are metrics. So just again, going down the list, actually, I'm going to ask you, how would you like me to show you the rest of this document? It's lengthy simply because of the fact that every row contains information. I can start with goal 1 and we can go down, or we can start with all of the goals, look at the first level of measures and then scroll down. It's easy for me to navigate through this document in whatever way makes the most sense to the board.
I guess the question is, what feedback are you looking from us?
I think the feedback that I'm looking for is we had, in our earlier community conversations, we asked, looking at our measurements, are there any measurements that we think are not helping us get to our goal, or are there missing measurements that would help us get to the goal? And when we discussed that, several of you asked, well, what are we currently measuring with the measurements? So that's where Tracy put this document together. So 2 things really. One, are there metrics that we should be including to support the measurements that are in the strategic plan, and or are there measurements we should eliminate because we don't see them as relevant any longer, and or measurements we should be adding, right? Like, so are there missing pieces, or are there pieces we should nominate to go missing? To make sure that we hit our 5 goals, because as you know, in the refresh, we're not changing the goals. We're staying the course because we know that 5 years is not a life cycle in a system to actually make sustained change. So that's the feedback I think we're looking for, and trying to create a document that supports this conversation virtually is a little challenging. It'd be a lot easier for us to sit around a table and kind of look at that together, but and so maybe there's a different way to get this feedback, in terms of maybe tonight as a first blush, then we take a look at it and come back to this again in January with some ideas. But it's really to kind of spawn an early conversation.
Yeah, I that might be a good idea. So for me personally, it will be helpful for me to sit down with this kind of in depth a little bit. In fact, I'd love to pull up the report from Mutu with the 16 measures, right? And kind of see where if they would be talking about something that we don't have reflected. And that would take me probably a couple minutes to do, but it might be handy just to do, I don't know if we'd want to spend a minute if there's anything that pops out to us right away, if that would be helpful feedback, or if you'd rather us just get back together in January to chat about it.
Well, maybe what would be helpful tonight in light of that, Director Cast, is there a format for this that you would find preferable? In other words, Tracy is fabulous at crafting and creating really anything, honestly, ergo chief strategy officer, right? And she's brilliant that way. So I wonder, maybe tonight, is the format, does it work for us? Would we like Tracy and the Razes and cabinet to try to figure out ways to integrate the 16 equity indicators into this and then shoot it back to you? Is there something else you'd like to see reflected on this chart, right? Like, so maybe it's more about formatting to help us have a conversation online in this strange and curious virtual space.
That's super helpful. I find this format great personally. The color coding actually is a visual cue that helps me quite a bit. So I quite like it.
Yeah, I'd just like to add in a comment to Dr. Malay. I think this is extremely helpful. When we talk to folks, like in the conversations with the board, questions were asked, what kind of progress are you making on this or that? And to see this tied into the goals and to have all these metrics laid out are really helpful. I would too be curious to see with the 16 measurements, where those fall into this grid, and if we are missing something. But to say what we're doing and what we're missing is really hard without something comprehensive like this. We can really see what we're currently doing. And just another thought is, if this kind of information lived on the website and interested parents or community members could click on maybe a topic of interest, let's say AP and IB humanities course offerings, if that was hyperlinked to the actual report data, then that would be really great. People could kind of just delve into whatever they're interested in and kind of answer those questions. How are we doing on these measurements?
That's a great idea, Director Kogan. And I also want to thank Siobhan, who dug up all of the goal reports from a year ago so that we could, because all the data was pulled, that's where Tracy pulled the data from, right? So this is all information we've publicly discussed, but we do it in goal bits. And this is like the comprehensive bite. I don't know.
I just think it's amazing we have this document after December 7th was the meeting where this kind of came up. So just amazing work. Thank you.
You're welcome. It was as much as I appreciate the kudos, it was not as challenging as it may have seemed. So I just needed the presentations in front of me. I went down the list. So.
No, I think it's, go ahead, Jackie.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in and agree. This is fabulous work, Tracy, and I think this format is great. I love being able to go down. I think the idea of somehow incorporating or perhaps referencing the 16 points, for each metric that we're looking at, just sort of say this one applies to, number 15 or whatever. And I like that, Director Kogan, you took the words right out of my head with respect to getting the community input on this presentation. I was thinking, one, it will take me, significant amount of time to sift through all of it, but I was thinking it would be great if we also, in doing that, had the feedback, in particular that we got from conversations with the board when people were coming up with suggestions and we were asking them, is this relevant? How are we doing? What are we not doing? What do you need to see more of? We could collect all of that input as well as Director Kogan suggested, make this accessible to them so that we can get more feedback from them. That would be great.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together. I'm a kind of a visual person, so it really helps me kind of look at it as a whole. Yeah, I think I like Director Kogan's suggestion of, when you add the measurements to the metrics, the numbers, the percentages, it could just be a short statement and then a hyperlink if there's a report attached to it or additional information if you have it. It might just be as simple, the increase in counselors went from the ratio to counselors to students went from 2016 to today. It was X, now it's this. But that would be helpful, and yeah, having it on the strategic plan portion of our website for the public to be able to peruse this stuff. There's just so much to track, but if it's all accessible, it's going to be very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, to use our instruction language, could we walk through one of these so that I have the visual of how to do this? So when I'm doing my homework on my own, I have a template to follow.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing, Director Hayes, is that you're interested in walking through, like following one of the goals down the chart. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I don't know that we need to do a whole goal, but maybe just one measure or something, just so that I have a template to follow, that I know what I'm doing. Kind of like a math problem. Can we walk through the steps of the algebra problem, and then I can follow that when I'm doing them on my own.
I'm going to rearrange you on the screen just so that you're at the top. It makes it easier. So let's pick a goal and let's talk about that goal in depth then in terms of what you're asking for, so that we can have that conversation. Does anybody want to select a goal to talk about? I see Director Kogan saying goal 4. All right, so if we were to look at goal 4, so that is around innovative, creative, critical thinkers. The measures that are embedded in the strategic plan that we said we would track over time are increased percentage of students who can justify a position with supporting evidence. Close your eyes, I'm going to scroll quickly. Increased percentage of students who apply learning to solve real world challenges in imaginative ways. Then increased percentage of students who demonstrate a mastery of relevant skills in multiple ways. Increased percentage of students who can explain how they reason through a problem or issue across subjects in their own lives. Increased percentage of students who successfully navigate critical transitions in their educational experiences. And then increased percentage of students who use appropriate technology and digital tools to facilitate classroom instruction projects, collaborative learning, and informed decision-making. So what was put in this column for goal 4 are the metrics or the things that the data essentially that we have currently for goal 4. And it's actually an interesting goal to start with personally, because it's the one goal that has the least quantitative data attached to it right now. Because one of the things that you may have noticed if you start to look at some of the other pockets of data related to the first measure for each of the other 4 goals is that a lot of this is quantifiable, right? I can tell you, for example, the number of counselors that we've hired, not off the top of my head right now, but we can tell you at some point the specific number of counselors that we've hired and what our counselor to student ratio is today and what we had previously had and what we know it's going to be. With goal 4, the metrics that we've been using are much more qualitative in nature because there aren't necessarily there wasn't something specific built into the strategic plan that said this measure is going to be measured by X, Y, and Z data points, right? So all of the data points that you see on this chart for any one of the goals are the data points that the regional assistant superintendents have been attaching to the goals based on their best estimate of how to tell the story of how we've made progress over the last 3 years, right? So with goal 4 and the first measure, when it comes to justifying a position with supporting evidence, we could show, for example, the number of students who are enrolled in AP English courses or IB English courses or AP or IB history courses. And in fact, we did share that information. But that's just one data point. Are grades what matters? Is that really what shows us an increased percentage of students who can justify a position? Who knows? We know that enrollment in the humanities course offerings has gone up from year over year, which is great because those are the courses where students really are working to justify a position. There are also other courses, such as some of our science courses, where students have to justify positions as well, but we've embedded that data into other measures for goal 4.
So I pause, Tracy, a minute. I know Director Cast in particular has really talked about what would assessment look like if we weren't wedded to standardized testing in the SBAC. And the goal 4 measurements look to be a fertile ground from which to imagine that. We could create our own internal assessment on some kind of project or some kind of assessment, I'll leave it open-ended, that identifies whether or not our students can justify a position with supporting evidence.
Yep.
And we could make choices to do that. And I guess that's part of the exercise that we're thinking about right now. If we're going to seriously move that data point, and if we think innovation is critical, and my goodness, I think the last 9 months have taught us something about that for sure. Then how do we nurture that and measure it? Because we know we won't attend to it if we're not in some way accountable to it.
Right. Right. That's an excellent point. And where this document or this chart leaves open the possibility is that there are spaces below each one of the lists of already identified metrics for us to say, and here's something new, right? Here's the assessment that we really want to see. And there's also the space to highlight certain metrics that are already listed to say, that's not really getting us to the information that we feel is the most important, right? Because to Dr. Reed's point, we'll measure what matters. And it's the conversations that the board will be having that will identify what matters.
So follow-up question, Superintendent Reed. So to use Sandy's homework analogy, is our homework to look at the metrics or to look at the measures?
Both.
Okay.
It's not to change the goals.
Oh, heavens no, we won't touch the goal. But you know,
yeah,
because the example you gave about, thinking about, the creation of some program or project or what have you within the system to that would be able to demonstrate, perhaps quite succinctly, being able to justify a position that wouldn't necessarily, in my mind, be a board role to suggest such a thing necessarily. I mean, to point to this measure and say, oh, there looks to be a gap. I don't know. I mean, some school boards do say, okay, let's do a specific capstone or what have you, right? But within policy governance, I would think that would be something we wouldn't quite do. And that's.
I would agree, actually. Yeah, you want to stay, honestly, even at the measurement level. But you might say, for this measurement, we want to tweak this measurement, and or we'd like you, superintendent, to go and identify some other metrics because we don't feel like we're getting a good representation of what this measurement could be.
So it seems to me there's really two things to look at with the measure. Kind of, yes, is it still of value to us? Or it's of value to us, but we need to pivot back and say we need more metrics, superintendent and team. So let's highlight this area as being perhaps not as filled as we like, but we still support the measure. Am I going too deep? Am I going too specific? Maybe I need to pull it back a little bit.
No, I think this is excuse me, a great question. Okay. It goes to the crux of this work, right? If we want more innovative, creative, critical thinkers, if that's a goal, and once a year you get a presentation that says, yep, we're meeting that goal, or nope, we're not. If I can come to you and satisfy each of those measures under that goal, then theoretically we're meeting that goal. So I think your work is at that measure category. I think the metrics are included to answer the question, what are we already doing in that category? And that's currently what we've reported. And you might say, we need to beef up attention to that measure and I guess that's a study session suggestion, because I think one of the parts of the refresh is, are there any of these measurements that maybe we just, at the end of the day, if we satisfied that, does it make a difference in the goal? And it's just a question I think that we need to be thoughtful about. And it's not just you as a board, but it's the students and the staff and community members, because as you know, we all crafted the measurements. But maybe we missed on one or two, or maybe we need to go deeper, or maybe it's a great measurement and we're still not feeling like there's enough good data. And kind of now's the time to say, we want to keep the measurement, and then it's going to be up to me to come through with more robust data.
Sounds great.
And honestly, goal 4 is a great one to start with for that conversation, because I think that's where we've been a little bit, as Tracy said, a little more qualitative and a little less quantitative. And we could get more quantitative, right? Like we could say, okay, all 5th graders are going to write a letter to an elected official to pursue a particular position XYZ, right? And all of a sudden, golly, we would increase, right? Like, I mean, we could make a statement like that. I would, obviously we would want to pivot back and work with teachers and that type of thing. But
Can I ask a question too? Dr. Malloy, you made a mention of under this goal 4 that there were some other metrics that, might respond to the measure of, say, can you justify a position with supporting evidence, but that they were included elsewhere. Is there any reason we can't sort of cross-reference? Because it seems to me we probably have any number of things going on, any number of metrics and measurements and data that's being collected that could apply to multiple goals or even multiple measures within a goal.
Yes, that's a really good point, Director McGurty. One of the things, in fact, when I was putting this together is the fact that, and I can't remember where to find it on goal 4 right now. I could scroll, but you'd all get a headache if I scrolled too fast. But there's a metric under goal 4 that also appears every time we look at goal 5. And it has to do with the number of students. In fact, it's the first metric under goal 5 for increasing the percentage of 9th grade students on track for graduation is the reference to Naviance, right? And the high school and beyond plan task completion data. We look at and at the number of 9th graders who've initiated their Naviance high school and beyond task list. We also look at it under goal 4 as, and if you'll just indulge me, I do remember that it's all the way down here at the bottom of the list. It's increased percentage of students who are successfully navigating critical transitions. We know that when students are completing their task list, they're thinking about the transition that they'll be making. That they've thought about the transition that they've made from 8th grade to 9th grade and how now things really matter. And they're also thinking ahead to the transitions that they will eventually make post-secondary. We also are looking at the number of credits earned by the end of 9th grade under goal 4, and we look at it also under goal 5. So there are definitely data points that we could say, we want to use this data point for this goal and this measure, and it also is going to be used to track another goal and its measure as well. I think there's a lot of crossover in that regard. It reminds me of how sometimes there's evidence of teacher performance, for example, something that a teacher does during their instructional practice that can be attributed to a variety of the components of the Danielson framework. And we note that. So there's no reason that, at least in my personal opinion, there's no reason that that couldn't be done when looking at measures for the strategic plan.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, so I think I've got this, but I'm gonna use the director cast flow chart because she loves those. So what we're doing is we look at, we're looking at goal 5 and we look at increased percentage of 9th grade students on track for graduation. And the first question we ask ourselves is, does that contribute to being ready for lifelong success after graduation? And if it's a no, then we say, no, we don't think that's a valued measure. And we put that in a chart, or I mean, we let you know that. The other option could be it's a maybe, that maybe it does, but it needs some tweaking. We need to add this word or change this, or it's a yes. And then if it's a yes or a maybe, then we say, okay, do these measures give us the information, or do these metrics give us the information that we need to know whether this measure is being met? But we do not get into what are the metrics. That's not our job. To Director Cass' point is in policy governance, that we don't start getting into the weeds of what are the metrics. We just say, don't think I'm getting the metrics that I need to be able to answer the question of, is this measure being met?
Correct. Yes. No, I think that's the power of conversation.
All right, I'm ready to do my homework now. We'll see if I
Well,
remember that.
I think that, we have to think about this document refreshed will live for 5 years.
Mhm.
And what will live will be the goal statements, the equity true line, and the measures. What will evolve will be the metrics. Those aren't static, right? Like those will and should evolve. Like I'm hopeful, while some of them we should steadily measure, others will, like our access to technology sort of mushroom this year as a matter of necessity, which we wouldn't have thought to measure some of the things we now can measure because we would never have predicted we would be in this situation. So I think we have to understand that the metrics are evolving. The measures and the goals will sit once they've been approved for the next 5 years to guide our work.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful.
And it's an hour in.
Excellent. As Dr. Reed, Dr. Malloy, are there any particular areas that you would want to bring our attention to as we do our homework for the next time we get together? I mean, obviously there's, like you pointed out, there's space, right? Where we might add, or you might add. I mean, are there areas of metrics that you're struggling with finding enough of them, or
my own personal opinion, President Swain, is that goal 4 is one that I think lends itself nicely to thinking about specific data points that perhaps haven't been shared, but that we're wondering whether or not there's data to contribute to determining whether or not the measure is coming to life in schools. You'll see there's a gap. When I started to fill this in, I thought, oh my goodness, like I was responsible for goal 4's presentation last year, and there's a gap in one of the measures. Like there was nothing there. And I don't think it's because there wasn't evidence. It's because we, like to Director McGurty's point, the evidence was contained and referenced under another measure, right? So having some specificity, I think in general, around here are some specific data points that we believe collectively through all of our conversations are important to use on a regular basis would be very beneficial from the systems perspective. Secondarily, I think to Dr. Reed's point, knowing that there's openness and there needs to be an openness to possibly new things that will come up over time would be helpful. And I don't know if it means that there's the kind of a wish for list that is captured somewhere for, if we had the ability to capture this kind of data, this would be helpful. And the reason that I say if we had the ability to capture is because something that I think is already known and understood, but I feel compelled to say it, is that there's data that's easily gathered, and then there's data that's not so easily gathered. And it has to do with how something might be written or how something might be imagined as an interest. So sometimes there isn't a specific thing yet that we have that just enables us to pull data from a particular system, right? It's easy, for instance, for us to pull data from Naviance because Naviance captures a whole lot of things. It's easy for us to capture information about courses that we offer, about trends in AP and IB test taking. It's easy to capture information from a healthy youth survey that's administered on a regular basis. It's easy for us to capture things from the SBAC tests, right? There are other things that we might want to know that aren't as easily drawn from a particular system that captures data. And so if there's something that people are interested in learning about and seeing as trends, we would need to have a little bit of a heads up about that so that we can identify where we might be able to source that information.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Anyone else? Thoughts, or Dr. Reed, anywhere else to go on this before we wrap up our time?
No, I think it would be wise for the board if you have an hour or two in the next few weeks to, and I'll resend the 16 equity traits. I have forwarded you from Lisa and the communications team, the feedback from conversations with the board. But just kind of to, lay it out on a table and look at it, and again, be thoughtful about the measures. And the metrics really will be, that's more of a means. And the measures are more of an end that leads to the goal accomplishment. So I think, yeah, I guess that's what I would say. And I suspect some of the measures might benefit from language from the research paper that Mutu shared with us. So some of it will be tight wordsmithing, and some of it, not so much. And I'll also make sure that our cabinet team has an opportunity to think about new metrics as we find the new measures, right? And that'll be our work internally. And of course, it'll be synergistic. But good luck with that. And I'm available to talk about it over the break as you are moved to talk about it.
Well, it might be helpful if you don't mind, Dr. Reed, if you could send this document along with the other reference documents you're talking about from Mutu and others, and maybe send it in a homework assignment for us, so we have all the tables and documents that we have in one place, and then we can go to that and then and review, give us a little guidance if you'd like, and then when did you want to bring this back up? Is that the next?
I think session. I'll look at the January schedule, and maybe you and I can talk about what makes the most sense.
Okay.
We could also jigsaw this, where each of you could volunteer to pick a goal and kind of comb through it, and then we could come back together and share your perspectives. But I suspect each of you may want to have a look at all 5. So I think if we were in person, we might take the one-off goal approach. But I think given our curious learning space together, perhaps it shouldn't take more than an hour or two just to kind of look at the whole picture and then come back for a conversation. So I'll write that all up in the assignment with a rubric for A, B, C, and D.
That would be great.
Maybe like an incomplete. We'll have to kind of take a look.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Anyone else or any requests or thoughts? Any other assignments, Dr. Malloy, Dr. Reed?
No, I think we've got it. You can expect something in the mail Friday in the brief.
Great. All right. Well, it sounds like we're finished. Thank you so much for putting all this together. This is really going to help us, do our jobs too, to keep all this straight in our heads and to participate with you and all the good work that you do. So I will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you so much. Have a great week.
Happy holidays, everybody.